Okay, let's start now with strategy and planning. I'm going to start with this question with Margaret. Now, the question is, in your view, in your experience, what makes mergers and acquisition in Asia different compared to the West?
I mean, we could start looking at the main KPIs, right? So volume, obviously the volume tends to be lower, although in the recent years it has become more and more. We could look at aggregate value, but then because of the foreign exchange rate in Asia, it's still lower than Europe, but this is about to change, I believe so. And we could look at the nature of the transactions. But I think these are all consequences of an underlying difference, which is basically their regulatory frameworks, which includes the taxation system, but also the cultural elements that derive into business. So business etiquette and really understanding what goes beyond just numbers. So I think those are the key differences.
Okay, when you've been through these deals, what do you think was the main reason for not doing it properly in terms of overlooking some element in planning? What is the pitfall that you normally see when an M&A activity started effectively?
I think the main element that is sometimes disregarded is how important culture is and its implications in every single step of the acquisition when it comes to transparency of data, due diligence, and then has its implications on the timeline, negotiations, religious implications. I've had deals that got delayed for months because there were issues around the acceptance of basically the religious system. It was considered unlucky to sign a deal within that month. And so,
Okay.
well,
You
there's
have to know
nothing
the
that can be
calendar
done.
well, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
You have to study the calendar, the religious calendar. It's very interesting. Thank you so much. This is so insightful, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So no, yeah, you were mentioning about the religious calendar, but that's something that we normally don't see in the West, of course, you know. And in terms of timeline, you know, from the moment you start, you identify a targets to post deal integration. Tell us the journey, because many think that this is such a mystery, and instead, you know, obviously you can demystify with your experience, of course, yeah.
Absolutely. I would say that timelines are typically a bit longer in Asia because it takes time um, to build a relationship. So it's easier when a relationship's already built. People don't just go straight into business. The other thing is there are a few challenges around data. So initially, there is basically the sourcing of the deal. So that depends whether the target is known or not known. So if you need to source target, you need to allow a few months. And then there will be basically an initial approach where you try to understand whether your target is actually open to be acquired. Once you do that and you agree on that part, then you would need to sign an NDA. That NDA can do back and forwards depending on which law applies. So it's finding an agreement. Sometimes there's also a power struggle there, but once the NDA is signed, then we start asking the target for information. This is to build the pre-offer notification. And on occasion, targets struggle to provide that information or don't feel comfortable sharing that information despite having signed an NDA. That can take a month and a half, two. Once that is received, then we build basically an initial model, which is then used to build a business case and get initial approval. Once that occurs, there is the agreement or the authorization to go through due diligence is obtained. And then that could take a few months when we get into due diligence, depending on how easy it is to gather data. In
Mhm.
Asia, it could be that some targets still rely on systems which do not allow them to gather data that easily, or a lot is paper-based, or they're just not confident about sharing that information yet. So there's a bit of trust, a bit of openness on them sharing the information that allows you to build a secondary model, which is basically the final business case. Once that is obtained, you get again to authorizations, approvals, and then you start finally the whole SPA, APA negotiation. So you need to build a draft. And then again, that could take months depending on whether it's easy or not to agree on a document that the warranties. Once that is agreed upon, we get to signing. Then we got a few clauses called the completion precedents, and then we get to closing, which is basically when the target is actually acquired.
And then we
So that
start
could take,
obviously with the post integration, yeah.
yeah, and then we get to the post integration. Interestingly enough, the target that I've seen took the longest. One target took almost 8 years to get acquired.
Yes, wow. But we need to encourage the listener here to say it's not always like that, you know.
Usually it's not like that. But on occasion, yeah, it is. It takes some time to build a relationship. Yeah.
Okay, so that's why it's important to have the presence that you obviously have, and you've had for so many years in Asia. Just, obviously, from the educational side, yeah, we would like to tell the audience about the difference between bolt-on acquisitions and strategic ones in Asia. Tell us about what you know, what you can tell us about your experience as well. Yeah.
I mean, they both occur within the Asia region. However, bolt-ons tend to be more frequent for several reasons. They're usually smaller uh, and considered less risky. The reasons behind doing a bolt-on is usually either to get market segment, or they want to acquire a new technology, they want to have reach or density. So the objectives and the risk is a lot lower. So bolt-ons do occur, I would say, a lot more. Strategic acquisitions will tendentially take longer
Mhm.
because there's a lot more risk. The financial considerations are a lot bigger. So the process, or the thought through process, is longer, I would say.
Okay, no, thank you for telling us that. And obviously, yeah, long discussion to be had about strategic ones because they are the ones that change are very transformational.
Correct.
But yeah, as you said, bolt-on acquisition may be faster for obvious reason because obviously it's more of a decision that is made and then it's executed more quickly. Valuation. Now we know that the exponential blueprint is a lot about leveling up entrepreneurs with investors, yeah, because the knowledge about, or we say the education about valuation is what we would like to tell more people about. In terms of the valuation expectation, I want to ask you this question. Have you noticed that those vary significantly by country in Asia? Tell us a bit more about the valuation, what people think, what people act on valuation in general in Asia.
So yes, absolutely. There's a lot of differences within the Asia region, and it impacts a lot more than everything. But valuation is also impacted. Bear in mind that valuation is very linked to stability of the country. So since different countries are stable, more stable, they have a more stable currency. Those all impact the valuation. Countries, however, are not the only factor determining the valuation. It impacts the industry. It impacts the market segment, the seller that you have in front, your growth perspectives. So there's a lot in play that comes into valuation. What I can say, though, is that the Asian Valuers Association would love to get to a system that is more harmonized across the region, but unfortunately, it's not yet at an implementation stage.
I suppose this is part of the fast growth that is experienced in these economies where there's still a lot to learn about how the West does valuation effectively. When you got fast-growing economies, you tend to have this type of this type of gap in sort of in education, I would say, but yeah, not a widespread knowledge about these deals, I would imagine. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. The regulatory frameworks are changing. There's a lot of appetite for M&I, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time for them to adapt. And so it's a little bit of patience, but there is a lot of appetite.
Okay. No, thank you for this. This is so insightful. And as we have been able to see with strategy and planning, it's so crucial to count on the right experience when it comes to M&A deal in Asia. Now, from one end, we have an opportunity, which is the opportunity of a generation, because the Asian economy are really growing that fast. We know about that. Really, with China obviously has been the main country that has been so growing, but now we got Southeast Asia really coming up really fast. From one end, we got the opportunities. From the other end, uh, the recommendation is really to act with as much education, knowledge, and experience as possible. And this is what we are so lucky to have with Margaret today. So thank you so much for covering this first phase.